You cling to hope like it can save you, but hope is the first thing I devour.
The battle over Christophsis had been running for 11 hours when the star did something stars were not supposed to do. Commander Wolfe, directing the 104th Battalion's orbital support from the bridge of the Vigilance, had 30 years of combined clone experience to draw on, and none of it included a protocol for what his sensors were currently showing him. The engagement had been standard: separatist blockade, Republic relief effort, the specific grinding attritional quality of a battle neither side was winning fast enough to justify the cost, and then the nearest star had begun collapsing. Not gradually, not in the way stellar events occurred, which was across timescales that made individual battles irrelevant by comparison. In seconds. "General Kuhn," Wolfe said, into the command channel, with the specific controlled quality he used when delivering information that would require the Jedi General to make decisions that his training had not specifically prepared him for. "I need you on the bridge." "I'm aware," Plo Koon said. His voice carried something Wolfe had learned, across their years together, to recognize as the Jedi equivalent of genuine alarm rendered compatible with continued function. "I felt it before your sensors registered it." "What did you feel?" Wolfe said. A pause. "The Force going very quiet," Plo Koon said, in the direction of the star. The star's collapse froze. Mid-implosion, the specific physical impossibility of stellar physics interrupted at its most violent point. The collapse arrested, as though something had reached into the fundamental processes governing stellar death and decided they could wait. The frozen explosion hung in space with the specific quality of things that should not be but were, the laws of physics visibly holding their breath. Then the energy came out of it. Not light, not heat, not any radiation that Wolfe's instruments had categories for. Black, specifically, precisely black, the color that existed when the absence of light was itself a substance rather than simply the lack of one. It spread across the engagement like something alive, tendrils of darkness moving through the vacuum with the specific purposefulness of something that knew where it was going. The Separatist ships stopped firing. The Republic ships stopped firing. Both sides of a battle that had been costing lives for 11 hours looked at the same thing simultaneously and reached the same conclusion through entirely different reasoning processes. Whatever this was, it had not been in anyone's operational briefing. "General," Wolfe started. "I hear it," Plo Koon said. Wolfe hadn't heard anything. Then he did. A voice. Not through the communication systems, not on any frequency his equipment operated on. Through the air of the bridge itself, as though sound were simply present in the space, rather than transmitted to it. "This galaxy reeks of weak gods." The figure appeared on the battle's visual feed from one of the Vigilance's external sensors, and Wolfe spent approximately 4 seconds trying to categorize what he was looking at, before abandoning categorization in favor of simply observing. Humanoid, female, standing in open space without a suit, which was the first impossibility. A headdress of black horns that were either armor or anatomy, which was the second impossibility. Surrounded by the spreading black energy as though it were hers, not affecting her, not threatening her, originating from her in the specific way that an aura originated from a presence rather than something the presence was exposed to. She was looking at the battle. The specific quality of her looking was not the assessment of a combatant or the curiosity of an observer. It was the quality of a god who had walked into a room where children were arguing about something and was deciding whether to be amused or impatient. She appeared to decide impatient. Hela had been in this galaxy for approximately 9 minutes and had already formed several conclusions. The first was that whoever had built the ships on both sides of this engagement had done so with considerable technical sophistication and almost no aesthetic imagination. Everything was gray or black, or the specific utilitarian brown of people who had decided function was the only relevant design criterion. She found this depressing in the specific way that she found most things depressing when they compared unfavorably to Asgard, which was most things and was itself a different kind of problem she was not yet ready to address. The second was that something existed here that she hadn't encountered before. Not the ships, not the technology. Something invisible, pervasive, running through everything in this galaxy the way the death energy of Asgard had run through everything in hers. A medium, a field, something that connected the living things around her to each other, and to something larger, and that had been, in the 9 minutes since her arrival, attempting to make sense of her presence in the way that an immune system attempted to make sense of an unfamiliar pathogen. She could feel it probing at her. She could also feel herself at levels below what Asgard had maintained, the specific diminishment of someone whose power was tied to something that no longer existed, who had arrived in a new context, still running on reserves rather than source. She was not weak. She was not remotely close to what these people would consider weak. But she was not what she had been before Surtur's fire, before the dimensional fracture, before arriving here with nothing but herself and whatever had survived the journey. She would need to rebuild. The battle around her had paused. She appreciated this without being particularly surprised by it. She had that effect. One of the smaller ships, she was already categorizing them, the ones with the specific energy signature that put her in mind of something alive, versus the ones that felt like complete machinery, oriented toward her position. Soldiers emerged from it. Not many. 6. In armor the color of bone, moving with the specific trained efficiency of military personnel who had been briefed to investigate anomalies and were implementing that briefing, despite the anomaly being significantly beyond the scope of what briefings typically covered. She waited. They landed on a piece of debris near her position, a chunk of destroyed hull that was providing the only available solid surface, and the one in the front raised a weapon. "Identify yourself and state your—" "No," Hela said. He fired anyway. She let the blast hit her. Not because she had to. She could have moved, could have deflected, could have done a dozen things that were faster and more elegant than simply standing in the path of an energy weapon discharge and letting it wash over her. She let it hit her because she wanted to know what it felt like, and because establishing what couldn't hurt her was information worth having, and because there was a specific message communicated by allowing someone to shoot you and then looking at them with mild interest that she found more efficient than any number of words. The soldier looked at the smoke, then at her. "Oh," he said. "Quite," she said. The Inquisitors arrived 3 hours later, which told her something about the information infrastructure of this galaxy. Fast enough to suggest good communication networks, slow enough to suggest whatever organization was sending them hadn't treated this as maximum priority, which was either confidence or miscalculation. She was, by that point, sitting in the wreckage of a separatist command ship she had found suitably dramatic, reviewing what she'd learned in 3 hours of careful observation from a position that gave her sightlines over both sides of the resumed battle, which had resumed after she'd made sufficiently clear that she had no interest in participating. The Inquisitors were 7, dressed in black, which she approved of, carrying weapons of contained light, which she found intriguing in the specific way she found all weaponized energy intriguing. The question was always what it did to things that weren't organic and weren't accustomed to stopping. Their leader landed 20 meters from her. He was tall. The helmet he was wearing had the specific theatrical quality of armor designed to communicate menace before capability, which she recognized as a choice and found somewhat provincial. He stood with his arms crossed and the bearing of someone who had been told they were the most dangerous thing in most rooms and had not yet encountered a room where this wasn't true. "You've created a significant disturbance," he said. His voice had a modulated quality. Something about the helmet, she noted. Compensating for something or creating effect. She hadn't decided which. "The dark side of the Force has reacted to your presence. You will identify yourself and explain your connection to—" "You feel it too," she said. He paused. "The thing that runs through everything here," she said. "The medium, Force you call it." She tilted her head slightly, the specific gesture she made when something was interesting enough to warrant attention. "I don't use it, but I can feel it reacting to me. It doesn't know what I am." "Nothing in this galaxy," the Inquisitor began, "is like me," Hela said. "No, I know." She looked at him with the particular assessment she gave to things that might be useful versus things that were simply in the way. You serve someone. The presence in the force that sent you. It's very careful, very controlled, very interested in things it doesn't understand. She paused. Your master is afraid. My master does not. She moved. Not at the Inquisitor, at the three on his left flank, who had been edging into an encirclement pattern that was tactically sound, and had required her to decide how much longer to let it develop before it became a genuine complication. She moved through them in approximately 2 seconds of violence that was more efficient than theatrical, which was itself a departure from her typical style. But she had decided that information was the current priority, and information required a live interlocutor. 4 Inquisitors down, the leader standing. 3 others, significantly reconsidering their positions. As I was saying, Hela said, returning to her position without having noticeably changed expression. Your master is afraid of things he doesn't understand, which means he's intelligent enough to recognize the category of thing I am. She looked at the Inquisitor leader, who was managing his response with professional competence. Tell me about him. You want information, he said. I want everything, Hela said. I always want everything. In this specific instance, I want to understand the power structure of this galaxy before I decide what to do with it. She paused. The beings I just incapacitated, they used the Force. I could feel it. They were drawing power through it, through something they call the dark side, and using it to enhance what they already were. She tilted her head again. Their power grew through suffering. This is interesting to me. The dark side requires something to channel it, Hela said. A vessel, a practitioner, a person who has shaped themselves into something that can hold that much concentrated negative energy without being destroyed by it. She looked at her hand, the specific considering gesture she made when she was thinking about herself as a variable. I am not a person who uses power through suffering. I am a person made of death, which is different and better, and I'm beginning to see how to combine them. The Inquisitor was very still. You're not afraid, he said. Most people, when they understand what the Inquisitorius represents. The people who sent you killed your colleagues on Coruscant, Hela said. Based on what I've observed of your organization's internal politics, they killed your colleagues everywhere. Systematically, over a long period of time. She held his gaze. You serve someone who murders his servants when they cease to be useful, and calls it strength. I recognize the architecture. It's the same architecture as every system I've ever dismantled. She paused. Tell your master I'm aware of him. Tell him I'll be in touch when I'm ready. And tell him, she smiled, which was not a comfortable thing to witness, that the next group he sends should bring something worth my time. She turned back to the burning ships. Behind her, she heard the Inquisitor hesitate, the specific quality of someone who had been given instructions for a scenario that hadn't included this outcome and was calculating whether their instructions covered the available alternatives. He left. She watched the battle and thought about what it meant that power grew through suffering in this galaxy, and what it would mean when she understood that mechanism completely, and what the specific shape of something that was made of death, rather than channeling it, could become when it absorbed a tradition built on the most efficient possible conversion of suffering into capability. She thought about it with the patience of someone who had all the time in the universe, because she was the thing that came after time ran out. And somewhere on a city planet that she didn't know existed yet, a very old man in a very large office felt a disturbance in something he called the Force, and had the specific experience of encountering a variable he hadn't accounted for and recognized, with the cold clarity of a genuine intelligence operating at full capacity, that this required his personal attention. He reached for his communication system. Lord Tyrannus, he said, there is something in the outer systems I need you to evaluate. He paused. Carefully, he added, which was, for Palpatine, the closest he came to admitting concern. The Sith holocron activated the moment she picked it up. She had found it in the ruins of what had been, until approximately 4 hours ago, a separatist intelligence outpost on a moon, whose name she had not bothered to learn. The outpost had been interesting for approximately 12 minutes. The intelligence infrastructure, the communication logs, the specific evidence of an organization running a war it appeared to be losing without understanding why it was losing. And then she had found the room beneath the room, which was where the interesting things always were. The holocron was a pyramid of red-black crystal that pulsed with energy she recognized as related to, but not identical to, the dark side she'd been observing. Older, the dark side, as it existed in the practitioners she'd encountered, had the specific quality of something that had been shaped by use, refined through generations of practitioners whose choices and passions and specific psychological architectures had left residue in the Force, the way use left residue in any medium. This was the dark side before those refinements. The dark side as raw material. She picked it up. It activated. Not gradually, immediately. The crystal's internal light shifting from dormant to fully operational in the specific way of things that had been waiting for a particular kind of contact. A figure appeared above it. Red-robed, masked, carrying the bearing of someone who had spent considerable effort communicating gravitas through aesthetic choices. "You are not Sith," it said. "Obviously," she said. "Yet the dark side recognizes you." "The dark side," she said, "is a medium. Mediums don't recognize anything. They conduct." She looked at the figure with the expression she used for things that were informative but not impressive. "You're a recording, a teaching construct. I am the preserved essence of Darth Exar Kun, Lord of the Sith, who achieved what no Sith had achieved before and—" "What are you teaching?" she said. A pause. "You interrupted my introduction," the figure said. "I have limited patience for preambles," she said. "What does the Sith tradition teach that I don't already know?" The figure, Darth Exar Kun's preserved essence, she noted, filing the name for later examination, was quiet for a moment, in the specific way of something recalibrating to an interlocutor it hadn't been designed for. "The dark side teaches that emotion is power," it said, "that suffering, rage, and passion convert to capability in ways that the Jedi's suppression of emotion prevents them from accessing." "I know this already," she said. "The Inquisitors demonstrated it. Continue." "The Sith teaching tradition began with the ancient Sith species," it continued, "and was refined across thousands of years of—" "Skip the history," she said. "Get to the mechanism. How does suffering convert to power? Specifically, what is the process?" Another pause. Longer this time. "You're not studying this in order to practice it," the figure said slowly. "I'm studying it in order to understand it completely, so I can improve on it," she said. "There's a distinction. The Sith spent thousands of years refining a tradition that treats dark emotion as fuel. I'm interested in what that fuel becomes when the vessel isn't a mortal practitioner, with mortal limitations." She picked up the holocron and turned it over in her hands. "Your tradition requires a person, a living practitioner who channels dark side energy through their organic limitations. I'm interested in what happens when the vessel has no organic limitations." The figure was quiet for a long time. "You are," it said finally, "something the Sith tradition has no category for." "Yes," she said. "What do you have that I can use?" She spent 3 days with the holocron. Not in the outpost. She moved, because staying in one location for extended periods was a vulnerability she'd identified early and had been eliminating wherever she found it. She moved across the moon's surface with the holocron active, having a conversation that was simultaneously the most intellectually stimulating exchange she'd had since her arrival, and the most frustrating, because Darth Exar Kun's preserved essence had been designed to teach Sith practitioners and kept attempting to frame her education in terms that assumed a relationship with the Force she didn't have. "The practitioner opens themselves to the dark side," Kun's essence was explaining, for what she calculated was the 4th time, with slight variations. "The suffering they carry, their rage, their grief, their desire, becomes the channel through which—" "I don't channel it," she said. "I am it." Start from that assumption and explain the Sith tradition in those terms. "The tradition doesn't have those terms," Kun said. "Then develop them," she said. "I am a recording. You're an intelligence constructed to teach," she said. Intelligent things adapt when their existing categories are insufficient. She looked at the horizon. The moon's landscape was dramatic in the specific way she found adequate as a temporary aesthetic. You said your tradition has no category for what I am. That means your tradition has a gap. Gaps are interesting. Gaps are where new things come from. She paused. The Sith spent thousands of years learning to channel death energy through living vessels. I am a living vessel that is also death energy. That's not a gap. That's a convergence point. Start teaching from there. Kun's essence was quiet for longer than any of its previous silences. When it spoke again, something in its register had changed. If you don't channel the dark side, it said slowly, but embody death directly, then the Sith limitation has always been the vessel. The practitioner always dies. The dark side remains. The tradition transfers, but the power never fully accumulates, because each practitioner must rebuild from a baseline. Yes, she said. But you, a pause. You don't die in the way practitioners die. I don't die, she said simply. Then the dark side accumulated in your presence, Kun said, and his register had shifted from instruction to something closer to genuine analytical engagement. Would not dissipate at your death because there is no death to dissipate at. You would be a permanent accumulation point, she said. Yes, I arrived at this conclusion 2 days ago. I was waiting for you to reach it independently as a test of your analytical capacity. And, Kun said, you're adequate, she said. Continue. The conversation continued for another 6 hours, and by the end of it, she had something she hadn't had when she arrived on the moon. A framework. Not Sith philosophy. She had been explicit about her lack of interest in philosophy for its own sake, but a technical understanding of the mechanism by which the dark side converted emotion into capability, stripped of its ideological framing and expressed in terms that applied to what she was rather than what Sith practitioners were. The framework had implications. She tested one of them that evening. The moon had a small settlement. She had been avoiding it for 3 days because civilian populations were typically more useful alive than disrupted. And disrupting things before she understood her environment was a strategic error she tried to minimize. But the settlement had a cemetery on its eastern edge, and cemeteries were useful for entirely different reasons. She walked to the cemetery at sunset. She stood at its edge and extended the specific quality of attention that she had spent her entire existence developing. The particular perceptive capacity of death itself. The way she could feel the specific resonance of life that had ended in the same way that other beings felt the specific resonance of life continuing. She could feel them. Not many, perhaps 30 graves, relatively recent. The specific quality of death that hadn't fully settled, still carrying the resonance of what the people had been, rather than simply the absence of what they were. 3 of them were force-sensitive. She hadn't known this was something she could detect until this moment. The force-sensitive dead resonated differently, not loudly, not obviously, but distinctly. The force connection that had defined them in life was still present in death, still active in the specific way that connections to something as fundamental as the force apparently didn't simply switch off. She reached, not with the force. She had been explicit about this with Kun's essence. She reached with what she was, with the death energy that was her nature rather than her tool, and she found the connection points between the resonance she could feel and the force those 3 individuals had carried. And she pulled. The ground moved differently than it should have. 3 figures rose. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical violence of things torn from rest against their will. They rose the way things rose when summoned, when called, when death energy offered a structure that the force residue in dead tissue apparently found adequate to animate. They stood with the specific quality of things that were not alive, but were not simply dead either, a third state she was developing vocabulary for. She looked at them. They looked at her. Interesting, she said. Their force connections were intact, not strong, not what they had been in life, but present, accessible, the specific residue of a lifetime of force sensitivity, still running in tissues that were no longer generating the organic processes that typically powered it, running on her instead. She had, she understood, just created something that the Sith tradition, which had spent thousands of years studying force-sensitive beings and their capabilities, had never managed to produce force-capable warriors who were not alive and therefore not subject to the specific vulnerabilities that life introduced into combat. She dismissed them back to their rest because she was not ready to deploy and didn't believe in unnecessary display. Then she picked up the holocron and said, "I'm ready to meet your Darth Sidious." Kuhn's essence, which had been observing, said, "I didn't offer to arrange that." "No," she said, "but you've been transmitting since I activated you. Someone has been receiving." She looked at the horizon. "Tell whoever is listening that I'll meet their master in 3 days at coordinates I'll provide. Tell them I'll come alone. Tell them," she paused, considering the appropriate phrasing, "tell them that what I just demonstrated is 1/10 of what I intend to build, and that a being intelligent enough to have engineered his own ascension to power is intelligent enough to recognize that conversation with me is more valuable than conflict." A long silence from the holocron. Then, in a voice that was not Kuhn's essence, deeper, more controlled, carrying the specific quality of power that didn't need to announce itself because its presence was already announcement enough. 3 days, Darth Sidious said. "I'll be there." The meeting happened on a round world that both parties had independently identified as neutral, in the specific sense that neither of them had particular interest in it, which was the closest thing to actual neutrality available in a galaxy where everything was someone's strategic interest. Hela arrived first, which she did deliberately. Arriving first communicated either eagerness or confidence, and she was interested in which interpretation he chose. He arrived in a shuttle so understated that it communicated its own kind of arrogance. The arrogance of someone who didn't need to arrive impressively because their arrival was impressive regardless of the vessel. He was shorter than she'd expected. This was the first thing she observed, and she filed it immediately under information about how he wants to be perceived versus what he actually is. Because short, powerful men who had achieved what this one had achieved typically had very specific relationships with the distinction between appearance and reality. He looked at her the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to bother understanding. "You're not in the Force," he said. His voice was interesting. She would give him that. The specific register of it, the quality of control in it, communicated practice and intention in equal measure. "No," she said. "Yet you killed 4 Inquisitors without apparent effort," he said. And the Moon settlement reported unusual activity near their eastern cemetery. "I was testing something," she said. "What did you learn?" he said. She studied him. "That the Force doesn't end at death," she said. "Your practitioners understood this already. Your Sith tradition has always treated death as a transition rather than a terminus. But understanding it philosophically and using it practically are different things. And you can use it practically," he said. "I raised 3 Force-sensitive dead," she said. "Their Force connections were intact, not at their living capacity, but present, operable, answerable to me, rather than to whatever the Force was doing with them before." Palpatine was very still. She read the stillness with the specific attention she gave to things that were trying to conceal their reaction, and what she read in the stillness was, he had not known this was possible, and he was deciding what it meant that she'd discovered it in 3 days, when his tradition had had millennia and not found it. "You're considering whether I'm more useful as an asset or a threat to be addressed," she said. "I'm considering several things simultaneously," he said. "It's my nature." "And I'm considering," she said, "whether you're intelligent enough to understand what I am and what I represent, or whether you'll make the mistake of trying to fit me into your existing categories." She looked at him directly. "The Sith tradition has a rule of 2. 1 master, 1 apprentice. Power concentrated, refined, transferred." "Yes," he said. "I'm not interested in the rule of 2, she said. "I didn't imagine you were," he said. "I'm interested in what your tradition has accumulated across thousands of years of refining the dark side," she said. "The techniques, the knowledge, the specific understanding of how suffering converts to power, and what that power can do at scale." She paused. "In exchange, I'm willing to let you watch what I build with that knowledge, which will be considerably more interesting than anything your rule of 2 has produced." "You're proposing an exchange," he said. "I'm proposing that you're intelligent enough to recognize that a being who embodies death and has just discovered she can field force-capable undead armies is more valuable as an observed phenomenon than a suppressed one," she said. "Your tradition has been searching for a way to defeat death for millennia. I'm not a way to defeat death. I'm what happens when death decides it's interested in expansion. That's more useful to understand than to destroy." He looked at her for a long time. "And if I disagree," he said, "then we find out what the dark side of the Force does when it encounters the actual source material," she said, "which would be genuinely interesting, but would also cost you resources you're currently using for other things." Another silence. "You said," he said carefully, "that you're not interested in the rule of two." "Correct," she said. "But you understand the Sith hierarchy," he said. "The structure, master and apprentice." "I understand it," she said. "I find it provincial. The idea that power must be confined to two individuals in order to remain concentrated, that's a scarcity model. It assumes power is finite and must be protected from dilution." She tilted her head. "Death is not finite." "No," he said slowly, "it is not. So the scarcity model is inapplicable to what I'm building," she said. "Which means the rule of two is inapplicable to what I'm building." She paused. "I'm not a Sith. I'm not applying for the position of Sith. I'm a queen establishing a domain, and I'm telling you that your domain and my domain can coexist if you're intelligent enough to manage that relationship correctly." He smiled. It was not a comfortable smile. "You are," he said, "genuinely unprecedented." "Yes," she said. "Genuinely dangerous," he said. "Also yes," she said. "And you believe," he said, "that I should allow you to operate freely in a galaxy I have spent decades arranging to my specific design." "I believe," she said, "that you're going to have a much more interesting problem to manage in approximately 6 months if you don't. Because what I'm building doesn't require your permission to exist and will become considerably harder to address the longer you wait." She held his gaze. "I'm offering you the specific advantage of having watched it develop from the beginning. Most rulers consider that valuable." He was quiet for a long time. The force around him was, she could feel it in the specific way she felt everything in this galaxy, through the awareness that came from being the medium that everything else was the absence of, active. Processing, the dark side swirling through his attention with the quality of a mind that moved in it the way she moved in death energy. "You're undead force users," he said finally. "How many can you raise?" "Currently, 3 comfortably, 10 with effort. The limitation is my connection to Asgard, which no longer exists, which means I'm operating on reserves that will grow as I find new sources." She paused. "Give me 6 months, and access to the right battlefields, and I'll show you what the number looks like when it doesn't have a ceiling." He nodded, slowly, with the quality of a man who had made a decision and was already thinking about its implications rather than its execution. "I'll transmit Sith archive access to a holocron you select," he said. "In exchange, I want regular reports on what you're developing." "Information for information," she said. "Acceptable." "And," he said, with the specific quality of someone adding a condition that isn't actually optional, "if your expansion begins to interfere with my specific arrangements." "Then we have a disagreement," she said. "And we address it the way two genuinely powerful beings address disagreements." She stood. "I don't kneel, Sidious, to anyone. If that's a condition of this arrangement, we should discover that now." He looked at her. "It's not a condition," he said. "It's an observation that most beings in this galaxy eventually understand is in their interest." "I'm not most beings," she said. "No," he said, and something in his voice carried, beneath the manipulation and the control and the specific theatrical quality of every word he said being chosen for effect. Something that was almost, not quite, the specific register of one extraordinary being acknowledging another. "You are not." She left first. He watched her go, and in the force around him, his attention had the quality of something recalibrating around a new variable. the specific adjustment of a master strategist, incorporating information that changed the board in ways he hadn't anticipated. He reached for his communication system. "Lord Tyrannus," he said, "I've completed the evaluation." "And?" Dooku said. "It is not a threat to be addressed," Palpatine said. "It is a development to be observed." A pause. "For now." He looked at the horizon where her shuttle had disappeared. "Inform our Sith archive administrators," he said, "that we'll be sharing certain materials, nothing operational, theoretical only." He paused. "And activate the monitoring systems on sectors 9 through 14. I want to know what those battlefields look like in 30 days. You're expecting her to move quickly," Dooku said. "I'm expecting," Palpatine said, "that everything she told me was accurate, and that accurate was also the most dangerous version of what she could have said." He closed the communication. "Begin preparation for Contingency 17. He had Contingency 17 because he had a contingency for everything. He was already, in the specific way his mind operated, building Contingency 18. 6 months moved through the galaxy the way death moved through Asgard, quietly, specifically, leaving different things behind than what had been there before. Hela had been busy. The Sith archive access Palpatine had transmitted was exactly what he'd said it was. Theoretical, carefully curated, nothing operational, and also exactly what she needed, because she had never been interested in the Sith tradition's operational methods. Operations were execution. Execution she understood without instruction. What the archive contained that she hadn't been able to develop independently was accumulated understanding of the Force's relationship with death across 4,000 years of Sith practitioners deliberately exploring that relationship. 4,000 years of people looking at the same phenomenon she was interested in and writing down what they found. She read all of it in 3 weeks. Then she spent 3 months testing the implications. The battlefields of the Clone Wars were, she had discovered, extraordinary resources. Not for the obvious reason. She wasn't interested in the political conflict, wasn't interested in either side's objectives, wasn't interested in the war itself, except insofar as wars produced the specific environmental conditions that replenished what Asgard's destruction had taken from her. Death on sufficient scale, with sufficient emotional intensity, with sufficient force sensitivity, present in the dying. This was the specific combination that she had identified as her equivalent of what sunlight was to organic beings. Not a metaphor, a resource. The war was producing it in abundance. She was not killing anyone to produce it. She had considered this question carefully and had arrived at a position she found both strategically sound and philosophically consistent. She didn't need to generate her resource, she needed to be present where it was generated. This was the difference between a parasite and an ecosystem participant. The war was generating casualties regardless of her involvement. She was simply ensuring that the death energy those casualties produced was directed productively rather than dissipating into the ambient force the way it normally did. What she was building with that energy was growing faster than Palpatine's monitoring systems had apparently anticipated. She knew this because his monitoring had become less subtle in the past month. The specific shift from observation to surveillance that happened when observers discovered the thing they were watching was larger than their initial assessment. His contingency preparations had moved through 17 and 18 and, she estimated, were currently somewhere in the low 20s. She found this flattering in the specific way she found most things flattering, with mild interest and complete indifference to whether the source intended it as flattery. Obi-Wan Kenobi found her on Felucia. Not found in the sense of tracked and located, found in the sense of encountered, which was different because Felucia was where she had chosen to be, and therefore finding her there was a function of her choice rather than his investigation, a distinction she considered important even when the person it was important to didn't know it. Felucia was a battlefield that had been a battlefield for 11 months, and had the specific quality that battlefields developed when they had been producing casualties long enough that the ground itself had absorbed the accumulated death energy and become something different from what it had been. The plant life had changed. The atmospheric composition had shifted in ways that the Republic's environmental monitoring flagged as anomalous and investigated without result. She liked it here. She was standing in a clearing that had been, until recently, the site of a significant engagement, when the Jedi General's ship landed at the clearing's edge, and he walked toward her with the specific quality of someone who had been told that the most effective approach to unprecedented situations was to begin with information gathering. He was not what she expected. She had encountered Jedi before. The Inquisitors who'd served as her initial orientation to this galaxy's power structures had been former Jedi, and from them she'd built a model of what Jedi were like. Controlled, disciplined, comfortable with the weight of duty, in a way that communicated long practice rather than natural ease. She had found them interesting, the way she found all practitioners of refined traditions interesting, as evidence of what dedicated people could accomplish within the constraints of their framework. This one was different. Not more powerful, she could feel the force around him with the specific perception she'd developed for it, and his was significant, but not the most significant she'd sensed, different in quality. The controlled discipline was there, but underneath it was something she recognized from the Sith Archive's psychological profiles of exceptional practitioners, a genuine philosophical relationship with what he was doing, rather than simply an operational one. He was thinking about being a Jedi, not just doing it. She found this interesting. "General Kenobi," she said, "I've read your file." He stopped walking at a distance she noted was carefully chosen, close enough for conversation, far enough for reaction time. "I don't believe I have one on you," he said. His voice had the quality she'd noticed in most people who encountered her: controlled surprise, the specific management of a reaction that was trying not to be a reaction. "You have a file on the battlefield anomalies," she said. "I'm the anomaly. The connection requires inference rather than documentation." She tilted her head. "You were sent to investigate. Ask your questions." He studied her for a moment. "What are you?" he said. Not rudely, with the specific direct quality of someone who had decided that the most efficient path to understanding was honest inquiry. "The goddess of death," she said. "Or I was. The title is somewhat situational currently." "Situational how?" he said. "My power was tied to a realm called Asgard," she said. "Asgard was destroyed. I survived, but she considered the word, rebuilding. This galaxy has been useful for that purpose." "The battlefield casualties," he said. "Yes," she said. He absorbed this with the specific quality of a Jedi processing information that complicated their existing moral framework, not dismissing it, not immediately condemning it, working with it in the way he worked with everything. "You're using the deaths from this war," he said. "I'm using the energy generated by those deaths," she said, "which would otherwise dissipate. I'm not causing the deaths. The war is causing the deaths. I arrived after the war was already running." "That's a careful distinction," he said. "It's an accurate one," she said. "Accuracy matters to me more than comfort." "What are you building?" he said. She looked at the clearing around them, the specific altered quality of Felucian terrain that months of her presence had produced. "An army," she said, "of a kind this galaxy hasn't encountered." "The undead Force users," he said. She looked at him. "Your intelligence is better than I credited," she said. "We've had reports," he said. 3 separate engagements over the past 6 weeks, where combatants, confirmed casualties, were observed to have returned to action. The medical reports were difficult to explain." "I imagine," she said. "The Force couldn't sense them," he said. And this was the thing his voice changed quality on. The specific register of a Jedi describing something that violated his fundamental understanding of how the Force related to living beings. They were there, present, moving, fighting, and the Force read them as absent. "Because they are absent," she said. "From the Force's perspective, the Force relates to life. These are not life." She paused. "But they carry Force connectivity from what they were. They can access it. They simply don't generate it." "That's not," he stopped. "Not possible?" she said. "You were about to say that's not possible." "I was going to say it's not something the Jedi tradition has a framework for," he said, with the specific, precise honesty she was finding increasingly characteristic of him. "Most things I do, fall outside existing frameworks, she said. It's one of my less convenient qualities. He looked at her with the expression she'd seen on genuinely intelligent beings when they were conducting an assessment they hadn't completed yet. Not judgment, not decision, but the active processing of someone taking in more than they could immediately sort. Are you going to destroy the galaxy? He said. The question surprised her, not its content. She'd expected something in this category eventually. Its directness. No, she said. Destruction is wasteful. I'm interested in dominion, which requires things to continue existing under different arrangements. She paused. If I wanted destruction, I would have started on the first day. What arrangements? He said. Mine, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. The Jedi Order can't allow that, he said. Not aggressively. Informatively, in the same register he'd been using for everything. Statement of fact, rather than declaration of opposition. I know, she said. The Jedi Order can't allow most things I'm doing. That's a tension we should both acknowledge clearly. She looked at him. You're one of very few beings in this galaxy that the force around you doesn't feel like it's straining to process. Most Jedi, she paused, reaching for the right description. Most Jedi feel like the force is working through them. You feel like you're working with it. The difference is small and significant. Is that relevant? He said. Everything is relevant, she said. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I'm paying attention to the difference. She paused. You should leave now. I haven't completed my... You've completed everything you're going to complete today, she said. And the next stage of what I'm about to do is something I'd prefer you observed from a distance rather than adjacent to. He looked at the clearing, at the specifically altered ground, at the quality of the air, at the place where 11 months of war had concentrated enough death energy that she had been charging something, slowly, the way capacitors charged, accumulating until there was enough for the demonstration she'd been building toward. He looked at her. What are you about to do? He said. Something Darth Sidious doesn't know I can do yet, she said, which means you have approximately 3 hours before his monitoring systems tell him, and approximately 6 hours before he decides that the contingency preparations have reached sufficient stage for deployment. You're counting down to a confrontation with Palpatine, he said. I'm informing you that one is coming, she said. I thought a Jedi with the quality of your observation should have the information. He looked at her for a long moment. Are you asking for help? He said. No, she said. I'm extending a professional courtesy to someone I expect to encounter again under complicated circumstances. She met his eyes directly. The Sith are not your allies. Whatever arrangement exists between the Jedi Order and the Republic does not make Darth Sidious your friend. You know this already. I can see it in how you carry that knowledge. She paused. What's coming may create temporary alignments that neither of us would choose under ordinary circumstances. I thought you should have time to consider that before it arrives. He said nothing. Go, she said. He went. She watched his ship leave and felt the force around the clearing respond to his departure. The specific settling of a space when a significant presence was no longer pressing against it. Then she turned to the ground, and she pulled. What rose from Felucia was not 3. What rose from Felucia was 247. 11 months of Clone Wars casualties, concentrated in a battlefield that had been producing Force-sensitive dead at a rate unprecedented in the war's history, because Felucia was where they sent Jedi, and Jedi died here at a higher rate than anywhere else, because Felucia's specific environmental conditions amplified the dark side in ways the Jedi command structure had never adequately accounted for. 247 Force-sensitive warriors. Not all of them Jedi. Some had been separatist commanders with latent sensitivity that had never been formally trained. Some had been clone troopers with the specific marginal force connectivity that Kaminoan breeding programs had inadvertently produced in approximately 3% of their population. Some had been civilians, collateral to battles that were supposed to be military engagements and had metastasized past those parameters. All of them hers. All of them carrying force connectivity that answered to her the way it had once answered to the force's natural currents. With a responsiveness that had no will of its own, that was simply available the way power was available to those who could access it. She stood at the center of 247 undead Force users and felt, for the first time since Asgard, the specific quality of adequate. Not satisfied. She was never satisfied, but adequate. The sense of having rebuilt enough that the next phase was genuinely possible rather than aspirational. Her communication system, she had acquired one, in the same way she acquired everything she needed, which was by identifying where it was and taking it, registered an incoming transmission. Palpatine. She accepted it. That, he said, without preamble, was not covered in our arrangement. Our arrangement covered information exchange, she said. I haven't transmitted information about this development yet. You're receiving it now, in real time, through your monitoring systems. She paused. I'm generous. 200 and... He stopped. You've been developing this for 6 months. Yes, she said. The archive materials I provided didn't include anything about. No, she said. I derived this from first principles, using the archive as foundational material rather than operational instruction. The archive taught me what the Sith knew about death and the Force. I extrapolated from there. She looked at her army. The Sith tradition spent thousands of years studying this relationship and never found this because they were always approaching it as practitioners, vessels, people who channeled the Force through themselves. She paused. The answer required someone who was the source rather than the vessel. You're beyond the arrangement, he said, and his voice had dropped the specific quality it had when he was performing and had arrived at what was underneath the performance. Yes, she said. The contingencies are insufficient, she said. Not because they're poorly designed, because they were designed for a category of threat your tradition has encountered before, and I'm not that category. She tilted her head. Sidious, you're an extraordinary being, genuinely. The architecture of what you've built, politically, psychologically, the specific patience of it. I've studied it through your archive, and I have significant respect for the craft. She paused. But you designed everything around the Force, your power, your plans, your contingencies, all built on your mastery of the dark side. And I exist outside that axis. Silence. You're telling me to stand down, he said. I'm telling you that what you're about to do in the next 6 hours is going to cost you resources you need for other things, and is not going to produce the outcome you've calculated, she said. I'm telling you this because I told you 6 months ago that I was more valuable as an observed phenomenon than a suppressed one, and that remains true. The quantity has changed. The principle hasn't. The quantity, he said, has changed considerably. Yes, she said. What do you want? He said. And this was new. She had not heard this specific quality from him before. Not the manipulative question, not the strategic inquiry, but the genuine question of someone who had assessed the situation and was determining whether negotiation was more productive than the alternative. She considered. The Sith archive, she said. All of it. Not the curated theoretical materials. The operational knowledge, the historical record, the holocrons you've collected, and the ones you know the locations of. She paused. In exchange, I will not interfere with your specific political arrangements in the core systems. Your republic, your senate, whatever you're building there, it doesn't interest me. I'm interested in the outer systems, the battlefields, the places this war has been burning through. She paused. And I want the rule of two formally acknowledged as concluded. The rule of two is a limitation you imposed on the Sith tradition to concentrate power and prevent internal competition, she said. I understand why you created it. I'm telling you that it ends with me, because I'm not subject to it, and I'm not negotiating its terms. I'm informing you of a fact. She paused. The fact is that the Sith tradition now has a member who cannot be killed, cannot be trained into submission, cannot be managed through the mechanisms the rule of two was designed to deploy, and who has 247 Force-capable undead warriors, and a growth trajectory that your monitoring systems can extrapolate better than I can articulate. She looked at the horizon. The rule of two ends with me. What exists after it is something we haven't named yet. A very long silence. If I reject these terms, he said. Then in 6 hours you find out what 247 Force-capable undead warriors do to whatever you've prepared, and we have a much less productive relationship for the duration," she said. "Which I find boring. I have no interest in destroying your operation, Sidious. I have interest in superseding it. Those are different objectives, and the first wastes time, the second doesn't." Another silence. She had not survived 1,000 years in Asgard's politics without knowing what silence that length meant. It meant someone was accepting something they hadn't wanted to accept and was taking the time to complete the acceptance before they spoke. "The full archive," he said finally, "against non-interference in core systems and—" He paused. "And what, exactly, superseding looks like. Superseding looks like me, building what I'm building in the spaces this war is creating," she said. "Your empire, when it comes, controls the core. My domain grows in the outer systems. We don't share territory. We don't share command structure. We don't interfere with each other's operations." She paused. "And you get to watch what the Sith tradition becomes when someone who can't die absorbs everything it has." "That's not a benefit," he said. "That's a threat." "It's both," she said. "From someone intelligent enough to distinguish between threats worth resisting and threats that contain more value as observations." She paused. "You've been building an empire for decades. I'm offering you a front-row position for something that will be studied across whatever comes after your empire. That's a legacy even a Sith Lord doesn't typically access." A final silence. When he spoke, his voice had settled into the specific register she had heard once before. Underneath the manipulation, underneath the performance, the acknowledgement of one exceptional being for another. "The full archive will be transmitted within the hour," he said. "Good," she said. "And the rule of two," he said, with the specific quality of someone saying something out loud to make it real, rather than because they needed to, concluded. "Yes," she said. "What rule replaces it?" he said. She looked at her 247 and thought about Asgard, which was gone, and about what she had been when Asgard existed and what she was becoming now that it didn't. "The rule of one," she said. The transmission ended. 2 hours later, the full Sith archive arrived. She sat with it, the way she sat with everything that was going to change her. Completely, without impatience, letting the scope of it develop before she decided what it meant. It was enormous. Thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, technique, study, failure, success. The specific intellectual inheritance of every Sith Lord who had ever lived and died and contributed something to the tradition's understanding of the dark side and its relationship with power and death and the Force. All of it hers. She began to read. The Jedi Council convened in emergency session on the 43rd day after Felucia. Not because they had received new intelligence. They had been receiving new intelligence continuously since Kenobi's report. A steady accumulation of data points that each required individual analysis, and that in aggregate painted a picture the Council had been avoiding looking at directly, because looking at it directly required acknowledging that the picture was complete. The picture was complete. Mace Windu presented it with the specific quality he brought to information he found personally objectionable, precisely, without editorial, letting the facts carry the weight that editorial would only have diminished. 17 systems in the outer regions have reported force distortion consistent with what Kenobi documented on Felucia, he said. The distortion doesn't match any known dark side phenomenon. It's not the Sith. It's not the dark Jedi profiles we've catalogued. It's, he paused. The Force in these sectors is experiencing something the archives have no category for. The best description available is that the Force is encountering something it cannot process. Cannot process, Yoda said. Like a wound, this is? Not like a wound, Windu said. Like an incompatibility. The Force is present in these systems. It's flowing, it's connecting, it's doing what it does. But there's something present that the Force doesn't know how to relate to. He paused. The Force reads it as neither living nor dead, neither light nor dark. It registers as nothing. A space where the Force's relationship with existence simply doesn't apply. The undead Force users she's raising, Kenobi said. He had been quiet since the session began. the specific quality he had when he was managing something he'd been sitting with for longer than the session had been running. Partly, Windu said, but the distortion is larger than what her army would account for. It's her presence itself. The Force is responding to her the way it responds to something fundamentally outside its architecture. Obi-Wan, Yoda said, you spoke with her. Yes, Kenobi said. What did you find? Yoda said. Kenobi considered. I found someone who is not evil, in any sense that our framework provides vocabulary for. He said carefully. She's not consumed by the dark side. She's not motivated by hatred or fear or the specific emotional distortions that we've learned to recognize as the Sith's particular pathology. He paused. She's motivated by what she's always been motivated by. From what I can determine from the archive materials we've been able to gather, the desire to be permanent, to matter in a way that can't be undone. He paused again. She's afraid of being irrelevant. Afraid, Yoda said. In her way, Kenobi said, which is not our way, and is not small. The army she's building, Windu said, returning to the display. Current estimate is 400, growing at a rate consistent with the battle casualty reports from sectors 7 through 14, which are the sectors she's been, he stopped, inhabiting. I'm not sure what word to use. She's not fighting. She's present where fighting is occurring, and she's harvesting. Harvesting, someone said, with audible distaste. It's the most accurate word, Windu said flatly. Yoda's eyes were closed. He had closed them 3 minutes into the session and had not reopened them, which the council recognized as the specific meditation he used when the Force was saying something he needed to hear without the additional input of visual information. The Force, he said, without opening his eyes. Troubled it is, not by darkness, by something it does not understand. Can it adapt? Kenobi said. Has the Force encountered something it didn't understand before? And adapted? Yes, Yoda said. Encountered something it cannot integrate. This is different. He opened his eyes. She exists outside the Force's relationship with life and death. The Force knows life. The Force knows death. What she is, the Force has no category. What does that mean practically? Windu said. It means, Yoda said slowly, that the Force will try to correct the incompatibility, the way a body's immune response corrects what does not belong. The Force will move against her, Kenobi said. Is moving, Yoda said. Already. The distortion Mace describes. This is the Force attempting to establish a relationship with something that does not participate in its relationships. He paused. Succeeding, it is not. The council sat with this. Sidious, Windu said. Has he moved against her? No, Kenobi said. Which is the most significant data point we have. He prepared. He deployed contingencies, and then approximately 43 days ago, everything stopped. He looked at the council. Whatever happened between them, it produced a ceasefire. Sidious has stood down. He made a deal, Windu said. He made the only deal available to someone who correctly assessed that the alternative was worse, Kenobi said. Which means Sidious, said Master Plo Koon, speaking for the first time, has determined that she cannot be defeated by the tools available to him. Yes, Kenobi said. And he's right, Plo Koon said. Not a question. A silence. We need to know, Windu said, whether we can do what Sidious cannot. The silence that followed had the specific quality of people sitting with a question they already knew the answer to, and were taking time to accept it before speaking. No, Kenobi said. Not alone. Not with what we currently have. Then what? Windu said. Kenobi looked at Yoda. Yoda looked at his hands. A temporary alignment, Yoda said, and the weight with which he said it communicated exactly how far outside normal parameters this conclusion sat. Both sides. All sides. You're suggesting we work with Sidious, Windu said. I'm suggesting, Yoda said, that what approaches may require every Force-sensitive being in this galaxy to face the same direction. He paused. Together, or not at all. Hela received Kenobi's communication request on the 51st day. She accepted it because she had been expecting it, and because she had decided, in the 6 weeks since the Felucia demonstration and the archive acquisition, and the specific ceasefire with Palpatine, that the Jedi Order would eventually arrive at the communication threshold rather than the combat threshold, that Kenobi specifically would identify it as the correct next step. She found him more interesting every time she encountered him. "You're organizing something," she said, before he spoke. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" "Because the Force has been doing something in this galaxy for the past 2 weeks that it wasn't doing before," she said. "Something large, coordinated. The dark side has been quieter than it should be, given current circumstances. The Sith don't get quiet unless they're being managed." She paused. "You're talking to Sidious." His silence confirmed it. "Congratulations," she said. "That required more flexibility than your tradition typically demonstrates. It required acknowledging that the situation has moved past what any single faction can address," he said. "Which isn't flexibility, it's accuracy." "Fair," she said. "The Force is moving against you," he said. "I know," she said. "I've felt it for several weeks. It's not," she considered. "It's not an enemy in any sense I recognize. It's not attacking me. It's trying to categorize me, establish what kind of relationship to have with my presence." She paused. "It's failing because there is no existing category. What happens when it stops trying to categorize and starts trying to remove?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about this," she said. "And?" he said. "The Force removing me would require the Force to engage with me directly," she said, "which it can't do through any mechanism I'm familiar with, because all its mechanisms relate to living beings or the Force-connected dead, and I'm neither." She paused. "But the Force working through living beings who are specifically configured to amplify its influence against something it's identified as an incompatibility, that's a different question." "Yoda," Kenobi said. "Yoda and Sidious. And everyone in between," she said. "If the Force is motivated to correct an incompatibility, and it has access to every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy working in concert, that's a different calculation than anything I've faced individually." "Is that a calculation you want to make?" he said. "No," she said simply. "Then what do you want?" he said. It was the same question Palpatine had asked, in a different register. From Palpatine, the question had been strategic. "What do you want that I can give you to make you less of a problem?" From Kenobi, the question was, she assessed it carefully, genuinely asking, not what did she want that could be accommodated, but what she wanted at the level of actual wanting. She found she had an answer she hadn't fully articulated before. "I want to not be irrelevant," she said. "That's the core of it. Asgard is gone. My title is gone, my army, my legacy, everything I spent 1,000 years building, gone." She paused. "But I'm still here, and I've discovered that this galaxy has something Asgard didn't, an ongoing, perpetual resource of the thing I'm made of. Death doesn't stop here. The war doesn't stop. The Force itself generates the exact conditions I require, simply by existing in a galaxy full of beings, who are born and live and die." She looked at the horizon of the world she was currently using as a base. "I want permanence. I want to be the thing that can't be removed, and I want whatever I build to outlast every institution in this galaxy, including the Jedi Order," he said. "Including everything," she said, "not out of hostility to any specific institution. Because permanence that excludes anything is conditional, and conditional isn't what I'm building toward." He was quiet for a long moment. "The Force going silent in entire sectors," he said. "That's your presence?" "That's my presence interacting with a Force that can't categorize me," she said. "The silence is the Force suspending its normal operations in the region because its normal operations require knowing what kind of relationship to have with every element of the environment, and I'm an element it has no relationship with." She paused. "It won't stay suspended. Eventually it resolves one way or another." "Which way do you want it to resolve?" he said. She thought about this seriously. The specific quality of attention she gave to questions that contained their own answer, if you were patient enough with them. "I want to be incorporated," she said. "Not absorbed, not corrected. Incorporated. The Force expanding its categories to include something that has never existed in this galaxy before." She paused. Whether that's possible, whether something as fundamental as the Force can actually do that, I don't know. But it's what I would choose if I were choosing. And if it can't, he said, then we have the confrontation your council has been preparing for, she said. And we find out what happens when the Force is trying to remove something that genuinely cannot be removed. She met his eyes through the communication channel with the specific directness she brought to important statements. I'm not telling you this as a threat. I'm telling you because you asked what I wanted, and I want you to understand what the alternative to incorporation looks like from my position. You'd rather not fight the Force itself, he said. Nobody should want to fight the Force itself, she said. That's a conflict with no satisfying outcome for anyone. She paused. But I've been in conflicts with no satisfying outcomes before. I survived them. He was quiet for a moment. I'll convey this to the council, he said. Tell Yoda specifically, she said. The council will hear what I said. Yoda will understand what I meant. The confrontation she had told Kenobi she didn't want came anyway. Not because anyone chose it, because events of sufficient complexity, involving sufficient numbers of parties with sufficient competing interests, produced confrontations as naturally as weather produced storms. The specific friction of three factions occupying the same strategic space and responding to the same perceived threat in different ways, none of them fully in communication with each other's decision-making process. Sidious moved first. She had expected this. He had made a deal with the Jedi Order that involved cooperative action against her, which was the correct strategic move from his position. Use the Jedi's Force amplification capability against a threat neither of them could address individually, then resume normal operations after. Clean, efficient. The kind of plan that had worked for him many times. The Sith and Jedi combined action hit her base on the 59th day, with the specific coordinated precision of two groups that had been trained in completely different traditions, finding their functional overlap under pressure. She was, honestly, impressed. Yoda was at the point. She had never been in proximity to Yoda, and the specific experience of it was the most novel thing she'd encountered in 8 months in this galaxy. He moved through the Force the way she moved through death energy, not channeling it, not using it as a tool, but existing as an expression of it, a being for whom the Force wasn't power but nature. She understood, watching him advance, that the Council had sent him for exactly this reason. He was the closest thing the living Force had to a direct agent. Hela, he said. His voice was small and carried everything. Master Yoda, she said. She did not reach for the army, not yet. You've come to resolve the incompatibility. Come to understand it, I have, he said. Resolution assumes incompatibility. Understanding may find something else. She looked at him. You're not here to remove me, she said. Remove a thing that cannot be removed, he said. Foolish, that would be. And I am not, whatever my students believe, foolish. He stood very still, and around his stillness, the Force moved in ways she could feel even from inside her specific outside the Force position. Reaching for you, the Force has been. You interpreted this as hostility. It felt like an immune response, she said. Yes, he said. The body, when it encounters something new, first it reacts, then it learns. He tilted his head, the specific gesture she recognized as his version of her own assessment expression. Learning, the Force is, slowly. Old it is, older than this galaxy. New things, they take time. She sat with this. You're saying the Force isn't trying to remove me, she said. It's trying to understand you, he said. As you are. Not as you should be. Not as it would make you. He paused. This is difficult for it. Nothing exists outside its relationships. You are the first thing in this galaxy that has been outside them. What does it need from me? She said. What you told the Jedi General you wanted, Yoda said. Incorporation, which requires, he paused, requires you to allow the Force to know you, not control you. Know you. She was quiet for a long time. I don't allow things, she said. No, he said. This I understood. Allowing requires trust, she said. Trust requires. She stopped. A great deal, he said. Yes. The battlefield was quiet around them. The Jedi and Sith who had accompanied the assault holding their positions. The confrontation's nature having shifted away from combat into something that didn't fit their operational categories. She looked at Yoda and felt, in the specific way she felt things that were true even when they were inconvenient, the accuracy of what he was describing. The Force wasn't hostile to her. The Force was afraid of her. Not in the way she was afraid of irrelevance, but in the way that very ancient, very large things were afraid of things they didn't understand, which was by circling rather than approaching. She had been circling too, both of them, for 8 months, orbiting each other like bodies in mutual gravitational pull that neither had been willing to close. "What does incorporation feel like?" she said. From the Force's side, Yoda was quiet for a long time. "Ask it yourself," he said. "I think it will answer." She reached, not with death energy, not with the Sith techniques she'd been developing, with the specific attention she gave to things she genuinely wanted to understand, the quality of inquiry rather than command, which was not her natural register and required specific conscious choice. The Force met her halfway. The experience was not what she expected. Not warmth, she had expected warmth, the specific thing she'd been told the Force was associated with when Jedi described it. What she felt was recognition. The Force touching the boundary of what she was, and recognizing that the boundary was real and was hers, and was not a wall to be passed through, but a border to be acknowledged. Not incorporation in the sense of absorption. Incorporation in the sense of addition. Something that had been outside a system, acknowledged as being adjacent to it, not inside, not subject to it, but existing in relationship to it, in a way that the system could now account for. The silence in the Force that had been spreading across sectors didn't end. It changed quality. The distortion that Windu had described, the incompatibility the Force had been experiencing in her presence, didn't resolve into compatibility. It resolved into a new category, a category that was hers. She felt it settle across the sectors her presence had touched, not the Force's normal web of connection and life, and the flowing relationship between living things, but something adjacent, something that ran through the same dimensional space as the Force, but carried different information, different resonance. Death. Not the death that living things move toward, not the death the Force knew through its relationship with life's end. Her death. Death as origin rather than terminus. Death as the thing that gave life meaning by being the boundary it ran against. The Force didn't absorb this. It made room for it. She stood on the battlefield on the 59th day and felt the Force acknowledge her existence in the specific way that fundamentally ancient things acknowledge things that surprised them. Completely, without pretending they had always known. Yoda watched her. "There," he said quietly. "Not what I expected," she said. "Rarely is it," he said. She looked at the army behind her. 412 undead Force users, still hers, still answering to her, but carrying something different now in the Force's relationship to them. The Force could see them, couldn't integrate them, couldn't reclaim them, but could see them, the way you could see something across a border that you couldn't cross. "This doesn't change what I'm building," she said. "No," Yoda said. "Expected it to, I did not." "It changes what I am in relation to it," she said. "Yes," he said. "Different thing entirely. Sidious is going to be," she paused, considering the word. "Furious," Yoda said, and something in his voice carried, beneath the gravity of everything else, a quality she recognized after a moment as amusement. She found she shared it. "He expected the confrontation to end differently," she said. "He expected you to be removed," Yoda said, "or the Force to be dominant, as it is dominant over all things in this galaxy." He looked at her steadily. "Not over you." "No," she said. "Complicated. This makes things," he said. "Everything I do complicates things," she said. "I've accepted this as a feature." He looked at her for a long moment. The specific quality of assessment that she had identified in him from their first interaction. The look of something genuinely ancient, considering something genuinely new. "Dangerous you remain," he said. "Extremely. she agreed. Unpredictable, he said. Always, she agreed. Outside our authority, he said. Outside Sith authority. Outside the Force's management. Yes, she said. He nodded slowly, with the quality of someone completing an accounting they had been running, and finding the final number is exactly what it is regardless of what they might have preferred. Then we understand each other, he said. We understand each other, she agreed. He turned to leave. Master Yoda, she said. He stopped. The Sith Archive, she said. There's a section I haven't been able to fully interpret. Ancient Sith research into death as a Force phenomenon, rather than a Force transition. Records that seem to be reaching towards something the Sith tradition couldn't quite grasp, because they were approaching from the wrong direction. She paused. I think I now have the right direction. The research will be significant. Significant in what way? He said. In the way that understanding a fundamental aspect of reality is always significant, she said, with applications that I cannot yet fully predict. She met his eyes. I'm telling you, because you're the being in this galaxy most capable of understanding it, and because someone should know beyond me. He studied her. Report what you find, he said, when you find it. To the Jedi Order, she said, with the specific quality of someone asking because they want to understand the scope. To me, he said, personally. She inclined her head. Not a bow, nothing approaching a bow, but an acknowledgement of a relationship that had just been established. Something between equals, who had decided that the specific category of equals, they were required a framework. To you, she said. He left. The battlefield cleared. She was alone with her army and the full Sith archive, and the new relationship with the Force that had been established in the past hour, and the specific sense of being exactly what she was, in a galaxy that now had a word for it. Not incorporated. Not removed. Acknowledged. It would have to do. For now,